The back door creaks open. It's not my husband. A stranger's shadow fills the kitchen, his fists clenched. My phone shows Mark's GPS at Chloe's house, but his heart rate spikes upstairs. I grab the key from the floor as Rick lunges, his breath hot on my neck. The man in my bed isn't wearing his watch, and the key in my palm unlocks more than just a gate. I bluff about silent alarms, shoving him out, but the real danger isn't behind me. It's upstairs, coughing. The health app lies. The watch lies. My husband's heart is racing, just not where it should be. The blue glow of the laptop screen etched deep lines into Sarah Miller's face, turning her skin the color of a bruise. She adjusted her glasses, the bridge pinching her nose. On the monitor, Mark's biometric dashboard pulsed with a steady, rhythmic green. Heart rate, 62 beats per minute. Respiration, shallow. The GPS icon sat motionless atop a residential grid 3 miles away, Chloe's apartment complex on 4th Street. Sarah shifted her weight, the hardwood floor groaning beneath her chair. A heavy, rhythmic snore vibrated through the closed bedroom door behind her. It was a wet, familiar sound that smelled of the bourbon Mark poured before bed. She turned her head, staring at the sliver of yellow light spilling across the hallway carpet. The man in their bed exhaled a long, whistling breath. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. She refreshed the data. The green pulse on the screen remained locked at Chloe's address, mocking her with its digital precision. Sarah touched the wedding band on her left hand, twisting the cool metal until it bit into her skin. The air in the kitchen tasted of stale coffee and copper. "Mark?" she whispered, the name catching in her dry throat. The snoring continued, steady and oblivious. She scrolled through the location history, the cursor trembling. Every coordinate pointed to an impossibility. If the man in her bed was breathing against her pillow, the man on the screen was existing in a ghost's skin across town. Sarah closed the laptop, the sudden darkness heavy as a shroud. In the silence, the radiator hissed. A metallic snake coiled in the corner. She reached out and touched the cooling ceramic of her mug, her mind racing through the variables. Sarah didn't just see a husband. She saw a data set that had suddenly developed a catastrophic variance. Mark was supposed to be in recovery, his body fighting a persistent fever that had kept him housebound for 3 days. Yet, the dashboard, the one she had linked to his wrist-worn health monitor to ensure his safety, told a story of a man who was physically active, his heart rate spiking to 90 beats per minute as he moved within the confines of Chloe Jenkins's home. The math didn't support the reality of the room behind her. Sarah stood, her knees popping with a sound like dry twigs snapping. She moved toward the bedroom door, her footsteps silent on the rug. She needed to see the discrepancy with her own eyes. She needed to know if the man dreaming of health was the same man the satellites were tracking through the night. The hallway was a tunnel of shadows, the air thick with the scent of lavender laundry detergent and the underlying metallic tang of Mark's medicine. As she reached the door, she paused. The snoring stopped. There was a long, hollow silence, followed by a wet, hacking cough that seemed to vibrate the very wood of the doorframe. Sarah's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, 110 beats per minute, she estimated, though no one was tracking her. She pushed the door open. The master bedroom was a cavern of gray light. The hum of the air purifier was the only constant. On the bed, a large, human-shaped mound lay beneath a heavy duvet. The silhouette was right. The sound of the breathing was right. But as Sarah stepped closer, her eyes scanning the nightstand, she noticed the empty space where Mark's charging dock usually sat. It was gone. and on the wrist of the man in the bed. There was no glowing green sensor. There was only a pale, bare arm. Sarah backed away, her breath hitching. The logic of her world was fracturing. She retreated to the kitchen, her sanctuary of cold marble and stainless steel. She needed more data. She needed to understand how a man could be a ghost and a guest at the same time. The silence of the house was suddenly shattered by a sharp, metallic click. It wasn't the radiator or the settling of the foundation. It was the sound of the back door's latch being forced. Sarah froze. The kitchen was an open-concept trap, the island offering little cover. She reached out, her hand closing around the cold, heavy handle of a cast-iron skillet drying on the rack. The weight of it was grounding. The iron bit into her palm, a physical reality in a world of digital lies. The door swung open with a low, agonizing groan of hinges that needed oiling. A draft of humid night air rushed in, smelling of cut grass and rain-slicked asphalt. A silhouette filled the frame, wide-shouldered, wearing a hooded sweatshirt that obscured his face. It wasn't Mark. This man moved with a jagged, nervous energy that set Sarah's teeth on edge. "I know you're in here, Sarah," the voice rasped. It was Rick Garcia, Chloe's ex-husband. The smell of stale cigarettes and cheap cologne preceded him, clashing with the sterile scent of her kitchen. Rick stepped into the faint light of the stove's clock. His hands were balled into white-knuckled fists. He looked around the room, his eyes darting to the corners, as if searching for hidden cameras. He was a man built of rage and suspicion, a door watcher who couldn't stand the thought of being observed. "Where is it?" Rick demanded, his voice rising. "I know you're recording me. I saw the lights. You and that husband of yours, playing your little games." Sarah gripped the skillet tighter. "Rick, you need to leave. You're trespassing. The probability of you leaving here without a police escort is dropping by the second." Rick lunged. He didn't move like a man. He moved like a falling tree, heavy and unstoppable. He reached for Sarah's phone, which sat on the counter, its screen still glowing with the GPS map. He believed the data was a weapon being used against him. They collided near the island. Rick's hand clamped onto Sarah's wrist, his grip like a vice. The heat of his skin was repulsive. Sarah swung the skillet, the heavy metal whistling through the air. It caught Rick on the shoulder with a dull, meaty thud. He grunted, the impact sending a jolt through Sarah's arm that vibrated up to her teeth. "Give it to me," Rick roared. He shoved her back against the refrigerator. The magnets clattered to the floor, a save the date for a wedding that had already happened, a photo of a dog but they no longer had. Sarah struggled, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She could feel the cold of the freezer door through her thin pajamas. Rick's face was inches from hers, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. He wasn't just looking for a phone. He was looking for a way to stop the world from watching him. "Rick, listen to me," Sarah hissed, her voice cutting through his grunts. "I just pressed the silent alarm. It's a direct feed to the precinct. In exactly 90 seconds, 2 patrol cars will be blocking the end of the driveway. If you leave now, you have a 40% chance of making it to the woods. If you stay, the math is 0. It was a bluff. There was no silent alarm, only a standard security system that she hadn't even armed. But Sarah spoke with the absolute chilling confidence of a woman who dealt in certainties. She didn't sound scared. She sounded like an auditor delivering a final notice. Rick froze. His eyes searched hers, looking for a flicker of a lie. But Sarah's face was a mask of cold calculation. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and the distant, low hum of a neighbor's air conditioner. Rick's grip loosened. He looked at the back door, then back at Sarah. The door watcher was trapped by his own paranoia. He backed away, his boots scuffing the tile. "This isn't over," he spat, though the threat sounded hollow. "You tell Mark I'm watching. I see everything." He turned and bolted into the night, the screen door slamming behind him with a tinny vibration. Sarah sank to the floor, her legs suddenly feeling like water. The skillet clattered onto the tile, the sound echoing through the empty house. Her hands were shaking, a physical reaction to the adrenaline surge she couldn't quantify. As she knelt there, trying to steady her breathing, her eyes caught a glint of silver on the floor. It was a heavy, brass-colored key with a jagged edge, lying right where Rick had been standing. It must have fallen from his pocket during the struggle. Sarah picked it up. The metal was warm from his body heat. It was a key to a gate. She recognized the brand. It was the same heavy-duty lock Chloe had installed on her back fence. The data had provided a physical link. Sarah stood, her mind already moving to the next calculation. She looked toward the stairs. Above her, the coughing began again. Hack, hack, pause, wheeze. It was a perfect rhythm. Too perfect. Sarah climbed the stairs, the key heavy in her pocket. She approached the master bedroom door again. This time, she didn't hesitate. She threw the door open and flipped the light switch. The room was flooded with harsh, yellow light. The bed was exactly as she had left it, a mound of blankets. But as she pulled back the duvet, her stomach dropped. There was no man. There was a collection of pillows arranged to mimic a human torso. And tucked inside the pillowcase was a small, high-end Bluetooth speaker. It was connected to a lead that ran under the bed to a specialized transmitter, a device designed to broadcast a biometric signal that mimicked a human pulse and respiration. The coughing sound erupted from the speaker, loud and startling in the small room. Hack, hack, wheeze. Sarah reached down and turned it off. The silence that followed was deafening. She looked at the transmitter. It was a sophisticated piece of hardware, the kind used in medical simulations. It was programmed to feed the health app exactly what she wanted to see. A sick man, resting in bed, his heart beating with the steady rhythm of recovery. The man she had married wasn't in the house. He wasn't even sick. He had turned himself into a digital ghost, leaving behind a loop of recorded illness while he moved through the shadows of the real world. Sarah sat on the edge of the empty bed. The scent of lavender was gone, replaced by the faint ozone smell of the electronic equipment. She touched the empty space on the mattress. It was cold. Mark had been gone for a long time. She stood up, her jaw set. The auditor in her was no longer just looking at a variance. She was looking at a fraud. She needed to find the source. She needed to find Mark. She moved through the house, her senses heightened. Every sound was a data point. She noticed the thermostat in the hallway. The digital display read 60 degrees, a chilling temperature for a midsummer night. Yet, as she passed the guest room, a wave of stifling, stagnant heat rolled out from under the door. She pushed it open. The room was a furnace. The air was thick and smelled of scorched dust and old mothballs. The curtains were drawn tight, and the heavy navy blue ceiling seemed to press down on her. In the center of the bed, there was a deep, human-shaped indentation in the mattress, as if someone heavy had been lying there for hours. Sarah pressed her hand into the divot. The springs didn't pop back. It was as if the weight of the lie had permanently deformed the bed. She backed out, the heat making her head spin. She needed air. She needed to think. She headed for the basement door, the one place Mark usually kept locked. As she descended the wooden stairs, The air grew damp and cold. The sound of a rhythmic drip-drop from a leaky pipe echoed with metallic precision, hitting the concrete floor like a ticking clock. Drip, tap, drip, tap. In the corner, behind a stack of empty moving boxes, she heard a low, mournful sound. It wasn't a cry. It was a hum, a funeral dirge. "Buster?" she whispered. She pushed aside the boxes. There, in a small, windowless storage room, was their golden retriever. Buster was huddled in the corner, his tail tucked tight against his belly. He didn't wag, he didn't bark. He just looked at her with wide, soulful eyes and continued that low, vibrating hum in his throat. "Oh, baby," Sarah breathed, kneeling beside him. The dog was shivering. She could feel the vibration of his fear through his fur. He smelled of damp basement and the sharp, chemical scent of the cleaning supplies stored nearby. She realized then why the house had been so quiet. Mark hadn't just faked his illness. He had neutralized the only witness who couldn't be fooled by a digital signal. He had locked the dog away to ensure the silence of this staged house remained unbroken. Sarah began to untie the rope that had been looped around the door handle to keep it shut. Her fingers fumbled with the coarse fibers. She needed to get Buster out. She needed to get them both out. But as she worked the knot, a shadow fell across the basement floor. "You really should have stayed upstairs, Sarah." The voice was cold, precise, and entirely unfamiliar. Sarah spun around. Standing by the furnace was a man in a crisp white shirt, his posture military straight. It was Gary Wilson, Mark's colleague from the firm, the man the office called the perfectionist. He was currently straightening the collar of his shirt, his movements robotic. "Gary?" Sarah's voice was a whisper. "What are you doing in my basement?" Gary didn't answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of heavy-duty plastic zip ties. The sound of them sliding against each other was a sharp, rasping hiss. "Mark said you were smart," Gary said, stepping into the light. "He said you'd eventually find the seam in the data. My job is to make sure you don't pull the thread until the transaction is complete." He moved toward her, his eyes fixed on her wrists. He wasn't angry. He was efficient. He was the cleanup man, the one who ensured the variables were managed. "Stay back," Sarah warned, her hand searching the floor behind her. Her fingers closed around a heavy, industrial flashlight, a 3-cell mag light that felt like a club. "Don't make this difficult, Sarah. It's just a matter of timing. In 60 minutes, the accounts will sync, the plane will be in the air, and you'll be free to go about your life. This is just a temporary quarantine." 60 minutes. The number burned into Sarah's brain. The cloud account. The automatic backup. If she didn't stop the sync, Mark would know she was onto him. He'd see the alerts on his phone. He'd disappear before she could prove anything. Gary lunged. He was faster than Rick, his movements calculated and low to the ground. He grabbed for Sarah's arm, his fingers cold and dry. Sarah didn't hesitate. She swung the flashlight with every ounce of strength she had. The heavy metal casing caught Gary across the temple. There was a sickening crack, like a stone hitting a melon. Gary groaned, his knees buckling. He slumped against the furnace, his white shirt staining with a sudden, dark bloom of red. Sarah didn't wait to see if he'd get up. She grabbed Buster by the collar and scrambled up the basement stairs. Her heart was a frantic drum in her ears. She reached the top, slammed the door, and turned the deadbolt. She could hear Gary stirring below, a low, rhythmic thumping as he tried to find his footing. She ran for the garage. It was the only way out that didn't involve crossing the open lawn in the glare of the streetlights. The garage was a cavern of cold air and the smell of motor oil. Mark's luxury sedan sat in the center, its tires caked in a thick, red clay mud that didn't belong in Shady Oaks. Sarah ignored the car. She moved toward the back workbench, her eyes scanning the shadows. There, tucked behind a stack of winter tires, was a designer suitcase. Floral print, expensive, and definitely not hers. She flipped the latches. The sound was like a gunshot in the still air. Inside, nestled among silk scarves and expensive perfumes, was a leather travel wallet. Sarah opened it. Mark's passport stared back at her, his soulful gaze frozen in a 2x2 photo. Beneath it was a printed itinerary, a one-way flight to Grand Cayman, departing at 3 a.m. 2 tickets, one for Mark Miller, one for Chloe Thompson. The betrayal wasn't a data point anymore. It was a physical weight, a cold stone in the center of her chest. Mark wasn't just leaving. He was erasing her. He was taking the life they had built, the shared accounts, the marketing audit of their marriage, and converting it into a currency she couldn't track. Suddenly, the garage lights flickered and died. A low, rolling growl of thunder shook the house, followed by the sudden, violent drumming of rain on the metal roof. The summer storm had arrived, and with it, the power to Shady Oaks vanished. The electronic locks on the garage door whirred and died, frozen in place. Sarah was trapped in the dark, the smell of wet fur and motor oil thick in her lungs. She reached out, her hand finding the cold metal of the workbench. She wasn't just an auditor anymore. She was a woman in a haunted house, and the ghosts were coming home. The darkness in the garage was absolute, a heavy velvet that seemed to press against Sarah's eyes. Outside, the storm shrieked, wind clawing at the siding of the house. Beside her, Buster let out a low, continuous whine, his body a warm, trembling weight against her leg. Sarah reached down, her fingers tangling in his fur. The physical connection was the only thing keeping her grounded. She needed to move. The clock in her head was still ticking. 45 minutes until the clouds sink. 45 minutes until Mark's phone alerted him that his wife had dismantled his digital shroud. She felt her way along the wall, her palms sliding over cold drywall and the sharp edges of garden tools. She reached the door, leading back into the kitchen. It was a heavy, fire-rated door, and without power, the electronic strike plate had locked down. She was caged. "Think, Sarah," she whispered. "Analyze the environment." She remembered the kitchen, the burner phone. If she could get to it, she might have leverage. She remembered the box of organic ginger tea Mark had insisted on buying when he got sick. He never drank tea. It was a variable that had never fit the model. She used the weight of her body to shoulder the door. It didn't budge. She felt for the manual override, a small lever near the floor she'd seen the installers mention years ago. Her fingers found a cold, greasy metal tab. She pulled. With a heavy, mechanical clack, the door gave way. The kitchen was bathed in the rhythmic, strobing light of the lightning. Each flash revealed a world of sharp angles and deep shadows. Sarah moved to the pantry, her feet silent on the tile. She found the tea box. It felt too heavy, the weight shifting unnaturally inside the cardboard. She tore the top off. Tucked between the tea bags was a slim black burner phone. It was active, the screen glowing with a single unread notification. Sarah's fingers hovered over the glass. This was a smart move, the logical step. This phone was the key to his communication, the receipt her mother never had. If she could access the messages, she could map his entire network. She knew the risks, but the reward was total clarity. She felt a surge of cold, focused confidence. She was the auditor, and she was about to close the file. She swiped the screen. It wasn't locked. Mark's arrogance was his one oversight. He assumed no one would ever look in a box of ginger tea. The message thread was at the top. Chloe. Sarah began to scroll. The words were a physical assault. The accounts are clear. Sarah has no idea. She's still tracking the dummy signal. See you at the gate at 2 o'clock. There were photos too. Spreadsheets showing their joint savings being drained. Wire transfers to offshore accounts in the Caymans. Mark had been systematic. He hadn't just cheated. He had liquidated her life. Sarah felt a grim sense of victory. She had it. The proof was in her hand. She could call the police, show them the transfers, and end this. She leaned against the counter, her breathing slowing. The crisis was under control. The data was hers. The phone buzzed in her hand. A new message. She found the phone, Mark. She's looking at it right now. Sarah's heart stopped. She looked at the top of the screen. There was a small red icon she hadn't noticed before. A camera lens. She turned around. There, tucked into the shadows of the crown molding, was a tiny, unblinking green light. A hidden camera. The burner phone wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. The back door, which she had locked after Rick fled, swung open. The wind didn't push it. A hand did. Mark Miller stepped into the kitchen. He wasn't the sweating, shivering man she'd seen 3 days ago. He was wearing a dark, waterproof jacket, his hair damp from the rain. He looked athletic, vital, and terrifyingly calm. In his right hand, he carried a heavy garden spade, the metal blade glinting in the lightning. "I told Gary you wouldn't be able to resist the data, Sarah," Mark said. His voice was like velvet, smooth and hypnotic, but the warmth was gone. It was the voice of a man who had already moved on. "You're so predictable. If there's a number to crunch or a secret to uncover, you'll find it. I just had to make sure you found it at the right time." Sarah backed away, the burner phone feeling like a hot coal in her hand. "You're not sick," Mark laughed, a low, melodic sound that made the hair on her neck stand up. "The Mark Miller pop," he said, and he cracked his knuckles in that familiar, rhythmic sequence. Thumb to pinky. Pop, pop, pop. "I needed 3 days of rest to move the funds without you looking over my shoulder. You were so busy being the caretaker, you forgot to be the auditor." "The police are on their way, Mark. I called them." "No, you didn't," Mark said, stepping closer. "The cell tower for this block went down with the power 5 minutes ago. And your landline? I cut that before I came inside. You're off the grid, Sarah, just like the money." He raised the spade. It wasn't a weapon yet. It was a barrier. He was blocking her path to the front door. "Give me the phone, Sarah. It has the encryption keys for the final transfer. Once I have those, I'm gone. You can keep the house. It's underwater anyway. Once the bank realizes the mortgage hasn't been paid in 4 months." Sarah felt the world tilting. The house, her sanctuary, her fortress of order, was a shell. He hadn't just stolen her future. He had hollowed out her present. "I have the key, Mark," she said, her voice trembling. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the brass key she'd taken from Rick. "I can get out. I can get to the neighbors." She bolted. She didn't head for the front. She headed for the back, toward the gate that led to the woods. It was a smart move. Mark was between her and the street, but the backyard was open. If she could get through the gate, she could disappear into the thicket of shady oaks and find help. She hit the rain-slicked grass of the backyard, Buster at her heels. The storm was a wall of water. She reached the heavy wooden gate, her hands fumbling with the lock. She shoved the key in. It didn't turn. She tried again, twisting the metal until it bit into her skin. The key fit the profile, but the tumblers wouldn't budge. It was like trying to open a door with a piece of scrap metal. Looking for this? Mark stood on the porch, holding up a small silver key. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. I saw you take that key from Rick's pocket during your little scuffle. Mark shouted over the wind. I thought it was a nice touch. I swapped the lock on that gate yesterday morning while you were out getting my medicine. That key you're holding? It opens a storage shed in Brooklyn. I thought you'd appreciate the irony. A logical person using the wrong data. Sarah slumped against the gate. The wood was cold and rough against her back. She looked up at the fence. 6 feet of solid cedar, topped with decorative lattice that was too flimsy to climb. The gate was chained from the outside. She wasn't in her backyard. She was in a cage. Mark stepped off the porch, the spade dragging on the grass with a wet, rhythmic hiss. You're penniless, Sarah, he said, his voice reaching her through the veil of rain. The joint savings? Gone. The 401k? Liquidated. I even took the equity out of your car. By the time the sun comes up, I'll be a ghost in the Caymans, and you'll be the woman who let her husband die of the flu while she went crazy with a spreadsheet. He was 10 feet away now. The Mark Miller pop echoed in the silence between thunderclaps. Now, he said, his soulful eyes turning into chips of ice. Give me the phone. Sarah looked at the black device in her hand. She looked at the man she had loved, the man who had turned her life into a series of corrupted files. She felt a cold, sharp clarity wash over her. It wasn't fear. It was the realization that the system wasn't broken. She had just been auditing the wrong person. You're right, Mark, she said, her voice steadying. I am predictable. I always look for the receipt. She didn't give him the phone. Instead, she held it up to the dark sky. The cell towers are down, she said. But the neighborhood security portal runs on a private, hardwired mesh network. I didn't just look at your messages, Mark. I initiated a live broadcast the moment I opened the app. Every neighbor in Shady Oaks, every person on the security board, is watching this right now. They're seeing the spade. They're hearing the confession. Mark froze. He looked up at the corner of the house, where a small weatherproof camera was mounted. The red recording light was pulsing, powered by an internal battery he'd forgotten to account for. In the distance, through the curtain of rain, a new sound emerged. It wasn't the wind. It was the low, mournful wail of a siren. Growing louder with every heartbeat, Mark's face contorted. The soulful mask shattered, revealing a frantic, cornered animal. He looked at the spade, then at Sarah, then at the fence. You bitch, he hissed. He lunged, but Sarah was already moving. She didn't try the gate again. She dove toward a section of the fence she'd noticed weeks ago while gardening, a loose board where the rot had set in near the soil. She kicked it with all her might. The wood groaned and splintered. She squeezed through, the rough cedar tearing at her clothes and skin. Buster followed, his hum turning into a sharp, triumphant bark. She hit the wet earth of the woods and ran. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The data was out. The audit was complete, as the blue and red lights began to dance across the white siding of her house. Sarah Miller stood on the edge of the woods and took a breath of the cold, rain-washed air. For the first time in years, the math finally added up. The aftermath of the storm left Shady Oaks in a state of eerie, dripping silence. The power hadn't yet returned, but the dawn was beginning to bleed a pale, watery gray. across the horizon. Sarah sat on the tailgate of a neighbor's Ford F-150, a heavy wool blanket draped over her shivering shoulders. The wool smelled of wood smoke and old hay, a primal, comforting scent that made the high-tech nightmare of the previous hours feel like a fever dream. A few yards away, the flashing lights of 3 patrol cars cast long, rhythmic shadows against the manicured lawns. Officer James Taylor stood by the back of a cruiser, his face a map of weary wrinkles. He was talking to Mark, who sat in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him. Mark wasn't looking at the officer. He was staring at the floorboards, his shoulders slumped, the velvet persona finely stripped away to reveal the hollow man beneath. "Is it okay if we take a look at that phone now, Mrs. Miller?" Officer Taylor asked, stepping toward her. He spoke in his usual questioning tone, his voice sounding like a tired grandfather's. Sarah handed him the burner phone. Her fingers were stained with mud and a little bit of blood from the fence, but they were steady. "The data is all there. The transfers, the messages, the flight itinerary. I also have a backup of the biometric fraud on my laptop." Taylor nodded, his eyes lingering on the device. "You did a hell of a job. Most people would have just cried. You built a case." "Data is an armor, officer," Sarah said, though the words felt different now. Less like a shield, more like a weight she was ready to put down. Across the street, she saw Chloe Thompson being led out of her house in handcuffs. Chloe was weeping, her posture slumped, whispering, "I'm so sorry," to the officer holding her arm. It was the sorry whisperer to the very end, still trying to apologize her way out of a multi-million-dollar heist. Sarah watched as the tow truck arrived to take Mark's car away. The winch groaned, a metallic shriek that echoed through the quiet street. The car, the symbol of their optimized life, was hoisted into the air, its mud-caked tires spinning uselessly in the morning light. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her own smartphone. The screen flickered to life. The power was back. A notification popped up. "Cloud sync complete, 100%. Sarah looked at the icon for the health app. Mark's data was still there. The fake heartbeats, the recorded coughs, the ghost of a man who never existed. She felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion. She had spent years tracking a stranger, treating her marriage like a marketing audit, only to find that the most important variable, trust, couldn't be quantified. She swiped the app. "Delete account?" "Yes," she whispered. The screen blinked. The data vanished. The Mark Miller file was closed. Sarah stood up, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. Buster was sitting at her feet, his tail giving a single, tentative thump against the metal of the tailgate. He wasn't humming anymore. He was just a dog, waiting for his person. "Come on, Buster," Sarah said. "Let's go home." She walked toward the house, her footsteps firm on the wet asphalt. The sun was finally breaking through the clouds, turning the puddles on the street into shimmering pools of gold. She didn't look at the police cars or the neighbors peering through their curtains. She looked at the front door, the one with the cracked strike plate she'd finally have to fix herself. She was penniless. Her marriage was a fraud. Her house was a shell. But as she stepped over the threshold and into the quiet, empty hallway, Sarah Miller realized she had never felt more healthy in her life. The air didn't smell like lavender or scorched dust. It just smelled like the morning. And for the first time, that was enough.